small pieces of information bit by bit, because it can be too difficult to swallow the whole truth. MSNBC's Chris Hayes and his news organization tried to rewrite history on Tuesday, describing the late segregationist Governor George Wallace of Alabama as a Republican. The Democrats have control over the Department of Education and what is taught to your children. They are trying to revise history and blame others for what they are responsible, not only in public schools, but they are lying right to your face on national television.
With this man, former Alabama Governor George Wallace, who 50 years ago today made his infamous stand in the schoolhouse door, a principled stand on behalf of evil. In defiance of the United States Justice Department, Governor George Wallace stood outside the University of Alabama, personally blocking 2 black students from enrolling there.
I stand here today as governor of this sovereign state and refuse to willingly submit to illegal usurpation of power by the central government.
Today, 50 years later, when we look back on that moment, on June 11th, 1963, we can tell very clearly the heroes from the villains. George Wallace was obviously the villain in this story, and Vivian Malone and James Hood, the 2 students who were blocked by George Wallace from registering that day, were heroes. Along with the rest of the civil rights movement, folks like Martin Luther King Jr., the people who are fighting for integration, they're the heroes, they're the good guys.
A segregationist is a person that wants to keep the races separate, coloreds separate from whites, separate drinking fountains, separate schools, etc. All the quote-unquote no coloreds allowed history came from the Democrats. Governor George Wallace was a Democrat, not a Republican. Wallace was a Democrat and a proud segregationist. Desegregation is the act of ending segregation, ending the separation of races, the bringing together of people of different races. Here is the truth about Wallace. In a vain attempt to halt desegregation by the enrollment of black students Vivian Malone and James Hood, he stood in front of Foster Auditorium at the University of Alabama on June 11, 1963. This became known as the stand in the schoolhouse door, after being confronted by federal marshals, Deputy Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach, and the Alabama Army National Guard. Wallace stepped aside. In September 1963, Wallace again attempted to stop 4 black students from enrolling in 4 separate elementary schools in Huntsville. After intervention by a federal court in Birmingham, the 4 children were allowed to enter on September 9, becoming the first to integrate a primary or secondary school in Alabama. Wallace desperately wanted to preserve segregation. Let's step back in time to another Democrat in history, Orville Faubus. He is best known for his 1957 stand against the desegregation of the Little Rock School District during the Little Rock crisis, in which he defied a unanimous decision of the United States Supreme Court by ordering the Arkansas National Guard to stop African American students from attending Little Rock Central High School. Faubus had a showdown with Republican President Dwight Eisenhower. In 1957, President Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican, deployed the 82nd Airborne Division to desegregate the Little Rock, Arkansas schools over the resistance of Democrat Governor Orville Faubus. Eisenhower then sent elements of the 101st Airborne Division to Arkansas to protect the black students, known as the Little Rock Nine, and enforce the federal court order. In retaliation, Faubus shut down Little Rock high schools for the 1958-1959 school years. This is often referred to as the lost year in Little Rock. Orville Faubus, the Democrat governor of Arkansas, was also a political mentor of Bill Clinton. So let's get the story straight. Try the truth for once in your life. Democrats never have and never will do anything for black people. They have a long history of fighting to keep you slaves. They have a long history of funding your abortion. They have a long history of keeping you on welfare in the name of looking out for you, the little guy. The history of the Republican Party is one that stands for black people. The Republicans freed the slaves. The Republicans passed the Civil Rights Acts. The Republicans forced the end of segregation. Black people need to stop the battered wife syndrome and leave the Democratic Party.